Farkhunda Malikzada was born in 1980 in Kabul, the largest city and capital of Afghanistan. She grew up in a complete Muslim family along with her brother. In 2015, 27-year-old Farkhunda was attending courses on Islamic law. She was preparing to start a teaching career and dreamed of becoming a judge in the future. Farkhunda was a courageous individual who was not afraid to express her own opinion. In addition to her studies, she was actively involved in volunteer initiatives. She lived with her parents, helped them weave carpets, and was an excellent cook. Farkhunda wanted to get married, but for some reason, she was unlucky. She was a deeply religious Muslim woman who wore a chador, a light female covering made of muslin, cotton, or silk, usually white, blue, or black in color, which is worn when leaving the house. The chador conceals a woman's figure from head to toe, leaving only the oval of the face and the hands exposed. Friends and mentors described Farkhunda as a modest, kind, respectful, and educated young woman who observed and honored all local customs and traditions. In Afghanistan, the Persian calendar is used, according to which the new year falls on the day of the spring equinox, March 21st or 22. A few days before the new year, on Thursday, March 19, 2015, Farkhunda Malikzada set off for her studies as usual. Before leaving home, she kissed her nephew and said goodbye to her mother. Farkhunda informed them that she would return in a couple of hours, and they would start preparing the house for the upcoming celebration together. The girl was in a wonderful mood as she left the house and headed to her Quran study class. On the way, she passed by the Shah-Du-Shamshira Mosque, which translates from Persian as the Mosque of the King of Two Swords. This two-story building is located in the city center on Andarabi Street, not far from the Kabul River. Its exterior walls are painted yellow. Farkhunda decided to visit the mosque to pray and chat with the elderly caretaker of the shrine named Zainulabidin. The man was standing on the street behind a counter, selling various goods. Farkhunda glanced at the counter. There were colorful scarves and amulets with spells. Opening one of the amulets, she found a paper scroll inside with an excerpt from the Quran. Mullah Zainulabidin claimed that his goods had magical powers and could work real miracles. The man promised that the amulets would help solve many problems, including allowing a woman to get pregnant quickly and easily. In addition to scarves, amulets, and scrolls with phrases from the Quran, Zainulabidin sold Viagra and at the counter near the mosque. Farkhunda began to get outraged and insisted that everything the mullah was selling had nothing to do with Islam. She got into an argument with Zainulabidin and tried to force the elderly man to close his trade. Their voices were quite loud, and a crowd began to gather around. A frightened Zainulabidin started accusing Farkhunda of collaborating with the Americans and then shouted to the mob, "This woman burned a copy of the Quran." Farkhunda immediately began to deny these accusations, declaring, "I am a Muslim, and Muslims do not burn the Quran." However, rumors about the burning of the sacred book quickly spread beyond the mosque. An enraged crowd rushed to the Shah-Du-Shamshira building. In these footage, Farkhunda can be seen standing in the mosque courtyard, surrounded by men, denying that she is an American and that she burned the Quran. She asks not to be filmed, but Farkhunda is ordered to shut up and not speak. Soon, the verbal altercation escalated into physical violence. The crowd began pushing the woman, she fell to the ground, and they started kicking her. The police arrived at the scene and tried to disperse the enraged men. Law enforcement officers fired several shots into the air, and people scattered in different directions. Farkhunda was sitting on the asphalt, covering her face with her hands. The men tore the chador off her head, her hair was disheveled, and her face was covered in blood. The police offered to take Farkhunda to the nearest station, where she would be safe, but the woman refused, insisting on being accompanied by a female police officer. Farkhunda did not trust the male officers and wanted to avoid unnecessary contact with them. Two mosque-goers helped her get up and led her into the inner courtyard of the shrine. All this time, the enraged crowd of men was shouting insults at her. Eyewitnesses were filming everything that was happening on their phones. The crowd of Afghans unanimously decided that for burning a copy of the Quran, Farkhunda should be killed and sent to hell immediately. Meanwhile, about 1,000 people had already gathered on the street. Everyone was watching to see what would happen next. It is believed that approximately 150 men took part in the lynching of Farkhunda. 150 men against one woman. The mob broke into the mosque. The police tried to push back the attackers, urging them to stop, but to no avail. The law enforcement officers helplessly dropped their hands and just watched what was happening. The men dragged Farkhunda to the roof of the mosque and threw her down. I will not go into the horrible details. It is only known that Farkhunda tried her best to resist, but she had no chance of surviving. The woman died near the mosque. After that, her body was tied with a long rope to a car and dragged along the street for about 200 meters. Then she was thrown into the dry bed of the Kabul River, pelted with stones, and set on fire. The fire could not catch on in any way. The men tore off their clothes and threw them into the fire so that the flames would engulf Farkhunda. The entire process of lynching lasted about 2 hours, with the crowd shouting "Allahu Akbar" with joy. Anti-American and anti-democratic slogans were also heard, accusing Farkhunda of collaborating with the Americans and working at the French embassy. At this time, Farkhunda's parents were at home waiting for their daughter to return. At around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Farkhunda's father received a call from her number, and he was told that their family needed to come to the Shah-Du-Shamshira Mosque immediately. Farkhunda's father, mother, and brother arrived at the shrine. They saw a huge crowd. The relatives still did not know what had happened and why there were so many people around. The family was sent to the police station for questioning. The investigators informed them that Farkhunda had gotten into an unpleasant situation. They claimed that the woman was alive and at the station. The police demanded that the relatives tell everyone that Farkhunda had mental issues, otherwise, they could face serious problems. The mother and father refused to do so. After that, the law enforcement officers informed the parents of the terrible news: their daughter was dead, and they needed to collect the body, or rather what was left of it. Farkhunda's mother recounted, "We went to the morgue, I opened the plastic bag, looked inside, and saw my daughter. I talked to her, wiped her hands and face, there were many burns on her body. I asked, why did they do this to you, daughter? I seemed to feel her answer, I'm not guilty, Mom, I'm innocent." After that, the authorities insisted that Farkhunda's family urgently leave Kabul for their own safety. Malikzada's father, mother, and brother left the capital. The news of the tragedy quickly spread through social networks, witnesses actively posted videos, and some of the perpetrators even boasted about their involvement in this horrific crime. The very next day, several high-ranking officials and religious figures publicly expressed support for the actions of the enraged crowd, arguing that no one has the right to disrespect the Quran. However, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani immediately condemned this brutality committed by his compatriots in broad daylight near the shrine. He ordered a thorough investigation. After several hours of intensive checks, Kabul Security Service employees reported that they had not found any evidence that 27-year-old Farkhunda Malikzada had burned the Quran or collaborated with the Americans. Officials and clergy withdrew their statements in support of the lynching. Looking ahead, I will note that later they were all dismissed from their positions. The Malikzada family returned to Kabul to lay Farkhunda to rest. The farewell ceremony for Farkhunda took place on March 22, 2015, 3 days after the tragic events. Thousands of people attended the funeral. Anger and rage gave way to shame and grief. According to Afghan traditions, the coffin with the deceased's body is always carried by men, but in Farkhunda's case, with her father's consent, this mission was taken on exclusively by women. When any of the men offered to help or tried to touch the coffin, the women shouted, "Don't you dare touch her." Where were you that day when 150 people attacked Farkhunda? Where were you? No one could answer this question. The women realized that they were carrying not just a coffin, but a true hero. It was one of the few instances in Afghanistan when women united and supported each other. 2 days after the burial, on March 24, thousands of women took to the streets of Kabul, chanting, "We are all Farkhunda." They were expressing their protest and demanding justice. Some of the participants painted their faces red to symbolically recreate Farkhunda's image moments before her death. The crowd marched to the Supreme Court building, demanding justice for Farkhunda and an end to violence against women. The rally was also attended by men who supported the women's protest. It was one of the largest peaceful demonstrations in the history of Afghanistan. In the case of Farkhunda Malikzada's murder, law enforcement officers detained 49 men, bringing various charges against them. The alarming fact was that these were not religious extremists, but ordinary Afghans. Moreover, they were not wearing traditional clothing. One influential official remarked, "They learned to dress in t-shirts and jeans, looked modern, but their hateful attitude towards women remained unchanged." Afghanistan's First Lady Rula Ghani could not understand why so many people believed the rumors. Why did they resort to violence so hastily? She stated, "I think this indicates that Afghan society has been living in an atmosphere of aggression for many, many years." A psychologist from Kabul who worked with women suggested that only herd instinct made the mob of enraged men believe that they would become heroes by carrying out a public lynching. 6 weeks later, the trial began. Human rights activists hoped that this case would become a turning point for Afghanistan. The court hearings were broadcast live. On May 5, 2015, verdicts were announced for the 49 defendants, 26 people were found guilty. 11 police officers were sentenced to 1 year in prison for failing to protect Farkhunda. 8 civilians were sentenced to 16 years in prison. 4 participants in the lynching were sentenced to death. This list included the mosque caretaker Zainul Abidin, who was accused of inciting the crime. Among the main suspects in the case was also 16-year-old Yaqub, the eldest son in the family, who was fond of football and boxing. On the day of the tragedy, Yaqub was working independently in his uncle's store, selling sunglasses. At some point, he heard a commotion on the street. Running out of the store, the boy saw a car with a lifeless body tied to it with a long rope. Yaqub, succumbing to emotions, instantly joined the crowd. The young man became an active participant in this terrible act. The video clearly shows Yaqub throwing huge stones at Farkhunda. Yaqub's parents were extremely upset to learn about their son's actions. They never thought he was capable of such a thing. At the same time, the father and mother acknowledged that although their son showed disrespect to the deceased, he was not a direct murderer. On July 2, 2015, the appellate court, in a closed session, mitigated the sentences for the convicts and overturned the death sentences. 3 men were sentenced to 20 years in prison, and Yaqub received 10 years. The 11 police officers who were sentenced to a year in prison spent only a few months behind bars and were released on bail. 4 of them were completely acquitted and even returned to their previous jobs at the Ministry of Internal Affairs. The court's decision sparked a new wave of protests in Kabul. Farkhunda's relatives, activists, and human rights defenders emphasized the unjustified leniency of the sentences. Such indulgence towards the criminals reflected the general tolerant attitude of Afghan society towards violence against women. The female protesters declared, "The Afghan government has once again demonstrated to the world how dangerous this country is for women. We understand that our authorities will again be unable to do anything to protect women. Farkhunda is not the first and not the last victim." A year after the tragedy, on March 23, 2016, a memorial was opened in Kabul in memory of Farkhunda Malikzada. It was installed in the same place near the Kabul River where the young woman's body was burned. In Afghanistan, Farkhunda was recognized as a martyr, an honor usually bestowed only upon fallen warriors. In addition to the monument, the street where the tragedy occurred was renamed in honor of Farkhunda. New caretakers were appointed at the Shah-Du-Shamshira Mosque. They forbade visitors from aimlessly walking around the shrine and using mobile phones. Khoja Naeem, the new supervisor, said that initially, many parishioners expressed dissatisfaction. He explained, "We tell everyone that they need to pray and leave because there is no point in just wandering around the shrine. As for the ban on mobile phones, it is completely justified. Why today, when someone falls, do we not extend a hand to help the person get up? Instead, we immediately reach for our phones. This should not be the case." After the incident with Farkhunda, many Afghan women complained on social networks that men, feeling their impunity, began to harass them even more brazenly and intrusively, accusing women of being to blame and bringing the anger of the crowd upon themselves. Women began to receive insults from male colleagues in offices and universities. They also noticed that many men rejoiced at Farkhunda's death, even knowing about the groundlessness of the accusations of burning the Quran. Men believed that Farkhunda deserved to die because of her insufficient piety, as the video of the lynching shows that she was dressed too openly. It is worth recalling that during the attack, Farkhunda lost her main head covering, and her hair was blowing in the wind. In addition, Afghan men justified the lynching by saying that Farkhunda paid the price for the fact that the young generation of Afghan women does not want to honor traditions and is inclined towards unbelief. Women activists stated, "We will continue to fight for our rights and the protection of women. We will also make efforts to ensure that innocent victims of brutal violence, such as Farkhunda, receive justice." However, Afghan women still live in fear. This story has come to an end. What do you think about this story? Be sure to like and subscribe to support our channel. Thanks for watching and bye everyone.